Serious. Teachers of Reddit. When have you met the parents of a student and suddenly understood their behavior? ESL teacher here. You'd be surprised by how much the way you talk influence your kids. I haven't had any particular horror story, but I've had plenty of students that talked very slowly, or very loud, or very softly, or with arrogance, etc. Each and every time I've met their parents, I've noticed their voice is exactly the same. Worst part is a lot of them weren't aware of this and said their children had a problem with the way they talk and I should help them with that. Parenting life pro tip. Kids are like sponges. They absorb everything they see the older people around them do, especially their parents. Act like you want them to act. Literally just posted about this. But I work at an after-school program and we have all K5 kids. There is a 4th grader who has to be the center of attention. He has to win every game. He will fake an injury to avoid losing being it. He says and does pretty nasty things to kids he sees as less than him. He's a bigger kid so he easily overpowers a lot of kids his age. And when we would go to his mother about his actions she would say that we lied and he would never do whatever he did. It didn't matter how many adults and students saw him do it, she denied and would then get upset with us. She'd say we're picking on him because he stands out. He echoes these words whenever he's in trouble. And it's a never-ending cycle that we can really do nothing about because there's nothing being done at home. Edit. Spelling. CCE teacher here. If you know anything about young kids, it's that their personality and behavior is heavily influenced by the kids around them. No matter how good, bad, serious, or rowdy they are. Sit 6 on them on a table with 1 or 2 rowdy kids, and the whole table will become one big rowdy mess 100% of the time. Well, 99.9% of the time. I had this girl. Completely serious. Rarely laughed. Always willing to help. And usually more mature than anyone else in her table or classroom. She was impervious to rowdy influences. To the point where I was actually concerned that there was something serious going on in the household. Had a general parent meeting with her parents, as I do with all the kids. I found out why. I have never dealt with more polite and solemn people in my whole life. I attempted 2 fail-safe jokes to warm up the mood and they failed so bad I had to pretend to write notes for almost a minute to regain my composure. Not rude or cold, just polite and solemn, is the only way to describe them. Like they were at a funeral. I worked as a teaching assistant at a school last year. One 8-year-old kid was incredibly competitive and would threaten other students who were in 2nd or 3rd place in competitions to stay in their place so that he could win something, and he would become incredibly red-faced and stressed. He would literally threaten his peers. He even threatened to kill other students over a competition of who could make this little robot move within taped lines on the floor. He would become completely irrational during competitions. It was crazy. Then his parents came in for school sports day and had a full meltdown when they didn't win the jokey parent race we do at the end of the day. They accused other parents of cheating because they had sports shoes on, whereas other parents had just come from work. So they just did the race barefoot. The dad went as far as demanding a rematch on a more level surface. Other parents just did a funny pose at the start line to make the kids laugh. Ran the race and fucking went home. Had a kid who would struggle to listen to anything or follow directions. When told what to do he would break down. Eventually got him to start listening a little bit. Met his mom. She lets him do whatever he wants. Even write on the walls in their house. She's too scared to tell her own child no. Small kid in grade 4, 9 years old, threatened another kid on the playground with a jackknife and said I'm gonna kill you. Called in his mother who was quite appalled and then warned us about his father. Exactly as she said. The man was unhinged. Within a few minutes he was raging angry and threatening the administrators. He was escorted off campus. Later he threatened to come back and the campus was locked down for the only time I remember in its history, and police were alerted. That poor kid has no chance of growing up normal. His dad is a bomb with an extremely short fuse. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree is so very true. There's a boy in my class who hits children and laughs about it, most often with small disturbing smile as the other kid freaks out. We've told his parent repeatedly, and she stands there with her arms crossed looking at us like we should go die. Then she smiles at her son and asks in an overly cheerful voice if he wants to get ice cream, go to the movies, play mini golf, essentially rewarding him for this behavior. It's so fucking infuriating, but it makes sense, because it's right there. Here's a lighter one. I had a student who always left their homework at school, always left their report at school, always left letters at school. I assumed it was all accidental to avoid their parents knowing about school things. Then we had parents' evening, and I had a lovely conversation with their mum. Mum asked for a particular sheet of information, and made notes on it. Then she got up and left, and I realized she'd left the sheet behind on the desk just like her child always did. I had an extremely self-absorbed and arrogant student. The only person in real life I've ever heard use the phrase "do you know who I am?" Apparently he had won some local sports contest and he really wanted to impress this younger student. He harassed every girl in the school. The first conversation I had with his mother, she sniveled. "You do know this is a sports school, right? Not an academics school." Click. I had this student who was so down on himself. His intuition for math was great and he would understand everything in class, but then there was no follow through, no effort on homework or anything. At parent-teacher conferences he had almost failed my class, but I let him do makeup work and he just barely made it. I spoke to him in front of his father and I said, "I think he can do better than this." The father looked at him and said, "I don't think he can. I think this is your best." I'm not supposed to contradict parents, but I said, "I think he will prove you wrong." I realized his father constantly shits on him, so he has no motivation. Kid ended up getting expelled shortly after for something unrelated. Pretty much every time there's a parent-teacher conference, yeah, the kid who doesn't do his or her work, there's a good chance that the parent's too busy on their phone to actually pay attention to what's going on. The kid who acts out in class, parents either spend the whole meeting screaming at the kid or they spend it screaming at the teacher. I do remember one specific conference when I was a student teacher, though. A kid had been having trouble with another student and had been escalating things pretty aggressively. When we talked to mom about it, mom responded with something very close to, "Well, I told her that she ought to slap that little bitch in the mouth." Gee, I wonder where the kid got it from. I was tutoring 3 kids in the same family. All of them were way behind from where they should be in school, barely reading, terrible at math, etc. I would work with them in their living room when grandpa walks by and says, "I don't know why you bother with that shit." I never learned to read and it never slowed me down. I quit shortly after that. 99% of the parents I meet go hand in hand with the kids' behaviors. Sitting at parent-teacher conferences, I pick up quickly on the little things and quirks. I'm always like, "Oh, that's where he gets it. Or that's why he acts that way." Spoiled parents make spoiled kids. Uptight parents uptight kids. Relaxed parents relaxed kids. Crazy parents crazy kids. Happy parents happy kids. I have one student that shows many signs of being on the spectrum. My team worked together, read research, and figured the best way to help him. We actually have made a great improvement. Then his parents picked him up and he reverts. We've talked to the parents and they just say he is naughty, not willing to talk about how to handle the kid in ways that have been helping him improve. Rarely is there an exception that I have met. I'm struggling to think of any examples right now, and it's tough. This happens frequently. The most common are those students whose parents are terribly overprotective and defensive. These students are overwhelmingly likely to be either arrogant, lazy types used to being bailed out, or anxious, quiet things terrified of disappointing their parents. But one parent in particular sticks in my mind. He was a really soft-spoken, kind chap, and totally blind from birth. His daughter walked him up to my desk where we talked for ages. He was appreciative of my time and feedback about his child, and spoke very fondly of her, then gently led him away to the next appointment, chatting away together. It made sense because this student was simply delightful in class, enthusiastic, kind and deeply empathetic towards others. She had time for everyone. I couldn't help thinking I'd just seen a fantastic relationship between a parent and child that had just been productive in every way. It cheered me up no end. My first year teaching, 10th grade, in a country in southern Africa, there was a girl in my class who was the queen bee. She looked older than she was and bossed all the other students around. She could be a real bitch, so I thought at the time. Constant attitude. Encouraged other kids to ignore me or defy me. A pain. We had a sort of parent-teacher conference. I brought her behavior up with the parents. They said, "We know she has a terrible attitude. We beat her all the time, and it does nothing. So what are we supposed to do?" They seemed genuinely at a loss. And from then on I just felt bad for her. Her teenage rebelliousness seemed a lot less offensive. Knowing that she had been beaten repeatedly, her bad attitude had been branded onto her.